Hello and welcome to another edition of the book review here at CCXP Exam Simulator. This is Michael Bartlett, and today I'm going to be reviewing What Your Customer Wants and Can't Tell You by Melina Palmer. Now, for those of you who don't know, Melina is the host of the Brainy Business podcast, and this is actually her debut book, so I was very excited to get an opportunity to review it. So without further ado, let's get stuck into the top 10 takeaways that I had from this book. So to begin with, the first one was this quote, which I really liked. If you tout something you do, even if everyone else does it too, the implication to the customer's brain is that you are the best at whatever the thing is. And this comes from an example she gives where she talks about Simply Orange. You have a number of commercials narrated by Donald Sutherland, and the thing that this particular business emphasizes is that all of their orange juice is made from whole oranges, no concentrate. And the point that Melina is making is if someone is looking specifically for that, there very well may be other products that do exactly the same thing, but because that has kind of been fused into the brain that that's what they do, they're more likely to pick that business even if other people do the same thing. The next takeaway, we all know about the power of association, but Melina gives a really nice example that I'm going to talk about now. So here's a quote from page 66. Our brains tend to associate our own emotions with the way a scent makes us feel. If you are needing to ask strangers for directions, stand in front of a bakery instead of a clothing store. They'll be much more willing to help you out. Now there's an entire book that's written called Designing Across Senses that I would recommend. It's an O'Reilly book. They give a really good example in that book about I think the tube stations, the underground in Japan, and how they've even programmed it now so that when you reach your particular stop that you're looking for, there'll be a particular sound that plays. So each stop has its own signature sound, and that book really goes into depth about how to design for senses. This particular takeaway from Melina's book was very useful because she's talking specifically about the power of scent. But if you want to learn more about that whole world, then I would recommend that book, Designing for Senses. The next takeaway was start with the expect error, give feedback nudges. So what do I mean by this? So here's a quote from page 139. Start with the expect error, give feedback nudges. Make a list of all the places where your customers are likely to err and possible nudges to help them get back on track, and consider all the senses. Very useful. I think the user experience folks listening to this would also find that useful. I'm designing an app right now, and every time the user could potentially do something wrong, I've got to make sure that that feedback is useful, instantaneous, so all those kind of things taken into consideration. So that's why I thought that was a really good takeaway from the book. The next takeaway was the overwhelmed brain. So I'm going to read from page 142 now. How often are you heaping mountains of decisions, facts, and figures on your current or potential customers in an attempt to help them make a better choice? Are you ever asking them to remember more than 5 digits of information and consider multiple things at once? In this passage, Melina talks about an example that Richard Chataway, who wrote The Behavior Business, gave her, I think, on his show. And he was talking about people being overwhelmed by the phrasing of a question. I think it was a security question when they called up their bank. So he basically recommended that they just add the words "take your time" to the script, which seems counterintuitive because obviously a bank's wanting to shorten down the length of the calls, make the turnaround of calls fast, but actually satisfaction went up and the call length was reduced by 11% as well. And that's because it calmed people down. They didn't freeze when they heard, if you get this wrong, then we're going to have to disconnect the call, that kind of thing. So it's another important point for an experienced designer, which is to think about the load that you're putting on a brain. And so I thought that was a great takeaway. Takeaway 5 was really interesting for me. I'd never thought about this properly before, but Melina talks about the difference between risk averse versus loss averse. So this information comes from page 144. Typically, if you've got lots of time to make a decision, then you are risk averse. But if time pressure is heaped on, then you become loss averse. And I'm going to read from that page now. People tend to be risk averse when they have plenty of time available. We don't want to make the wrong choice, so we evaluate the risks of making a decision. But when time pressure is applied, we become very loss averse, and then the fear of missing out takes over. Takeaway number 6 was something called partitioning. I've got quite a bit to read actually on this section. This was really fascinating for me. Okay, so this comes from page 149. When something is partitioned into smaller containers and you are required to take an action to get more, such as grab and open another bag or box, it creates a new decision point, a small transaction cost, and will drastically reduce the number of people who tear into another serving and keep eating. It is much easier to continue reaching into the open bag of Cheetos. You already made the decision to open the bag and eat them, and each reach into the bag is just supporting the decision you made earlier. To your brain, it feels like it is just part of the same decision to eat chips. And serving size kind of goes out the window until you hit a barrier, i.e. bottom of the bag or stomachache. What if, instead of having your air conditioning set to the same temperature all day, it turned off every few hours and made a ding so you could decide if and when to turn it back on? Being forced to physically get up and turn it on might nudge you to wait a couple of hours and use less energy. In some cases, you want to eliminate the choice because stopping to think about the decision over and over may result in someone changing their mind. Imagine if Netflix asked if you wanted to maintain your subscription and you had to opt back in every month. They'd have a lot fewer subscribers, but it doesn't necessarily mean anyone would be happier about it. So I thought that was an excellent takeaway, and I'd not really seen much along the lines of partitioning before, so that was a new takeaway for me. Takeaway 7 is on the pain of paying. So I'm going to read to you from page 162. In general, luxury items, experiences, and events feel even better when paid in advance. Getting the pain of paying out of the way before the experience starts mean you can have all the joy of the gain without any of the dreaded payment pain. There are a number of other examples she gives as well in this section. I really like the one about the taxi cab, because we all know what it's like to be in the back and you're just watching that number slowly creep up and up and up, and it's painful as it happens. So there was a whole chapter around that. I thought that was excellent, really well done. Takeaway number 8, the escalating value in reciprocity. So this is actually pretty funny. This is page 190, and there's a reference to the Big Bang Theory, so I'm going to just read from the book. As Sheldon Cooper of the Big Bang Theory once said, "Oh, Penny, I know you think you're being generous, but the foundation of gift giving is reciprocity. You haven't given me a gift, you've given me an obligation." When Penny says he has no need to give her anything in return, Sheldon replies, "Of course I do. I now have to go out and purchase for you a gift of commensurate value and representing the same perceived level of friendship as that represented by the gift you've given me." And this, in a nutshell, is how the brain processes gift giving. However, Melina says, I would say Sheldon got one thing wrong. He said that he would have to go out and purchase a gift of commensurate value as whatever Penny got him. In reality, our brains tend to overvalue gifts, and we receive and compensate in a way exceeding that. So that's something I'd never heard of before. I think most of us all know about reciprocity, but I didn't realize it tends to escalate in value between gift giving. So that was very interesting to me. Takeaway number 9, reciprocity in negotiating. So this was quite a nice, simple little takeaway from page 196, and I quote, "And when it comes to reciprocity in negotiation, I absolutely love the term Kwame Christian, host of the Negotiate Anything podcast, uses. Compassionate curiosity. Being curious about the other person and compassionate about their perspective is a gift you can give them that will make them more likely to want to give back to you, perhaps with a friendlier negotiating process." So I thought that was a really great takeaway. Takeaway number 10, context trumps price. So this is very straightforward. This is actually a little quote from the book that I loved. Melina says, everything that happens before the price, i.e. the context, matters more than the price itself. So a lot of people tend to get hung up on I've done this myself. What should I charge? How can I maximize the price point? Obviously, you're trying to balance against the number of people that may purchase and against the amount of money that you may make. And what Melina says is a lot of people are focusing on the wrong thing. Actually, what's more important is all of the context around that leads up to the moment where you set your price, because there's so much framing, so much priming that you could be doing that, really the price is kind of just a small part of that. So an excellent takeaway there. And honestly, this book was so packed with information, I had to just have a bonus. It's the first time I've ever done this. So my bonus takeaway: the only reason people buy anything is to solve a problem. Okay, so we all know that. There's nothing revolutionary about that. But the next part: problems make people feel anxious or uneasy. That means people are more likely to embrace herding behavior when buying things, and to look to see what others like them have done before. So I thought that was an excellent takeaway. One of my favorites from the book. That probably along with partitioning were my favorites. So yeah, what an amazing book. I love how she basically takes the whole field of behavioral economics and how you can apply that to business, and then breaks it down principle by principle, kind of like Robert Cialdini does, but obviously she's got tons of them in there because there are so many of these little things that can affect the way that people perceive a business and then behave in terms of buying a product. So so that's all I got to say on this one. This was a fantastic book, and I think if anyone is new to behavioral science and they're coming from the business perspective, the first thing I would tell them is go buy Ripple by Jez Groom and April Velikot, and then once you've got that, move to this book second. And I think those two books together will give you a brilliant foundation of everything that you need to move forwards, and then you can start looking at maybe some more advanced text like Decoded and Unconscious Branding and books like that. But this was just phenomenal, and hats off to Melina for creating such a great book. The other thing I should point out is that in the book, at the end of each chapter, she even shows you relevant episodes of her podcast that you can then deep dive into if you want to know more. So really, you're not just getting the book when you buy this, but you're getting kind of a roadmap for future learning. Okay, that's all from me today. So I hope you enjoyed this book review. And if there's any other ones you guys want to see, just drop me a line at support@ccxpexamsimulator.com or just hit me up on LinkedIn. Until next time, take care. Goodbye.